This is Dennis Raimondi with the Coffee League. Today with Lem Butler. Lem, the 2016 U.S. Barista Champ. He had worked at Counterculture and now is the owner, along with 2017 Barista Champ Kyle Ramage and their company, Black and White Coffee Roaster. They have retail. He has a long history, Lem, you do, in coffee. You won a lot of regional competitions. And man, anybody that knows anything about these coffee competitions, which just recently I'm learning about. They are very competitive. If you win, you got to be good and you got to stand out in a big crowd. So, thank you so very much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, thank you for having me, man. You've done your history there.
Yeah,
Did your
I do
research.
I've done a couple of thousand interviews in my time, so I've learned to do my homework. But and you are, and I'm just not just saying this. You have a very interesting background. I mean, you're in North Carolina. You are in specialty coffee, have been there for a while, and you've risen up the ranks. And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you first got into coffee, working at a cafe or whatever, you weren't planning of making a career of it, were you?
Oh no, no. It was yeah, it was just at the time I needed a job, and I did a lot of music. I was in a band and a DJ, so I lived that nocturnal lifestyle for a while, and I wanted something in the morning. I'm a morning person, and the first thing I saw in the paper was a barista early morning shifts, and so I went for it.
And at that time, were you a coffee drinker? Did you have an interest in coffee, or was it pretty much new to you? Go ahead.
Yeah, it was completely new. I didn't drink coffee at all through college. I drink soda pop, so I didn't drink
Uh,
any coffee. I mean, I didn't even know what a barista was. I just saw a coffee shop, early morning shifts, and yeah, and I went out for it, and I was hired on the spot actually.
okay, and then when did it click to you that, hey man, I really like this. The coffee is fascinating. I'm going to go for it. Was there an aha moment of that type, or did that come gradually?
Yeah, it was. I think it was. Well, it wasn't like it was more of a gradual thing with the whole career thing, but I think the aha moment was when I saw the first Southeast Regional Barista competition. It was 2004. My coworker, he, 6 months into being a barista, I was actually on my way out because I was thinking about doing other stuff. And my coworker came to me and said, "Hey, man, I'm competing in this barista competition, and I would love, for as many people to come out and support me." And I thought I was joking. A barista competition? Are you
Hmm.
serious? And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, come on out." And yeah, I checked it out. At the time, I was really big into watching Iron Chef, so like the competitive food shows.
Hmm.
I really dug it, and I show up at this competition, and it's like three stations, espresso machines. There's all these baristas. There's music playing. There's an MC. I was like, this is incredible. And it was at that moment I was like, yeah, I've got to do this. So I had to stick around for another year in order to compete.
Well,
So
now how did
yeah.
you prepare for competition? You get the bug to do it. Then how do you prepare? And for those people that aren't familiar with barista competitions, they're quite complex. You have to know a lot, and I think a big part of it, Lem, is also you have to have, and you have this, a very charismatic personality. I met you briefly recently in Seattle at the Seattle Coffee Expo, and I mean briefly, just for a few minutes, but I'm a pretty good judge of people. I haven't been around for a while, and I could tell you had that charisma. So tell us about how you prepared for it and how personality works its way into the competition.
Well, my first competition, just seeing it and being on the bar for 6 months to a year, I figured I could just show up and I'd rock that competition, you know. And so there wasn't a lot of preparation that went into it for that first competition, and I showed up and competed, and out of 25 competitors, I placed 23rd.
Uh-huh. So
So that was pretty low. And that was when I figured, there's probably more to this competition than I thought. And that was when I started going over to counterculture, and I started taking a lot of the classes and started talking to people about, what was expected in the competition. And the first thing they told me was, read the rules. So, yeah, there's a part of, of the competition where there's hospitality. You find that in most cafes, you treat people as your guests. The other part of it is the knowledge and knowing the coffee and being able to present, some very high quality drinks and explain, why the judges are going to taste what they're tasting, whether it has to do with, where the coffee is from, what origin, what country, what elevation, the processing. You want to connect the flavor notes that they're tasting in the cup with where the coffee is coming from and what that coffee has gone through. Mm-hmm. So I spent, basically a year working with, at the time, her name is Cindy Chang. She's Cindy Ludwigson now. She's the director of WCE, World Coffee Events. And, she worked at Counterculture, and she basically took me under her wing and as she was my mentor and basically showed me what the competition was about and helped me prepare for it. And from that beginning of preparing for the competition, I've kind of taken that and used that every time I competed. The competition has evolved over the years and things have changed with the rules, but it's basically the same. You have 15 minutes, you're making 12 drinks, 4 espresso, 4 milk drinks like cappuccinos, and then 4 signature drinks for these 4 sensory judges. And then there's the technical side too, where you have these technical judges that are watching how consistent you are with your dosing, how much you're wasting. Every single minute detail counts, because if you take all the best baristas in the country and put them on stage, you have to, judge them accordingly so that, it's basically how many mistakes will you make before you're booted out of the competition.
Right.
Because I don't know if you saw it this weekend or this past weekend, but there are some really good baristas.
I did.
Both seasoned and some very new ones that, first coming to the competition. And, so you're judged on all these minute things.
Right. I'll tell you, Lem, not having those skills from my side, I'm a journalist, more reporting on it, I'm blown away by the skill level. So tell us when and where was your second competition, and did you have a better experience that second time round?
Yeah, so I spent a year practicing and getting to understand the competition, and I went back to the regional competition. I won it, and when you win your regional, you represent your region on a national level. And so I went directly to the semifinal round of the national, and then that was more of a of a continuing thing. It's like I would make it through the regionals, and I would make it only as far as the semifinals on the national level, and never made it into the finals until 2016.
Mm-hmm. So you kept at it. Okay, and then also tell us about your work at Counterculture, because at some point you went into Counterculture, and that seemed to have a big influence on your knowledge and commitment to coffee and that profession.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it came from the owner of the Daily Grind Cafe where I worked. She was more into developing her staff, their knowledge in coffee, so they can understand what they're serving the customers. And the more time I spent at Counterculture and the more I competed, I went from cashier to barista to trainer to general manager, and then there was nothing left, and so I needed something more. So 4 years at the cafe, my next step was to get over to Counterculture, and I just basically came through the back door. I was bagging beans for 2 years, and after bagging coffee for 2 years and still competing, the position that I had when I left was customer support and education.
Right.
And I did that for 8 years, and it just doors just kept opening up to the industry, and just seeing that it was a lot bigger than I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I was a part of something a lot bigger than myself.
Right.
In connecting people through coffee, which is an amazing thing.
Right. But by the way, I wanted to mention that for those that are not familiar with Counterculture, they're a great company. We recently had an interview on our podcast here with Peter Giuliano, who great guy, now on the board of the Specialty Coffee Association of not only America, but it's America and Europe now. Did you have much interaction with him when you were at Counterculture?
Oh yeah, he was another mentor of mine. When I was still at the Daily Grind, I would take classes over at Counterculture, and he was one of the educators. He was actually hired from the West Coast over to Counterculture to develop the education program, and it just so happened that they needed a head roaster as well, and so he stepped into that role. So my very first class at Counterculture, Peter G taught, and his title was Master Roaster, and I was just amazed at the knowledge this guy had and how he was able to deliver this message of especially coffee to all the students in the class. And I was beside myself. This dude is amazing. And so I kept going and taking classes, and they had these public coffee cuppings every Friday, and he would lead them, and I would come to those as well. Just kind of absorbing all of this knowledge that this guy had,
Right.
and then when I worked for Counterculture, he was still there, and it's like, oh, I get to work with some of my mentors, and it was just an incredible experience.
Right. Who are some of the other folks you looked up to or continue to look up to and consider mentors in the coffee world?
Yeah, so Peter G is still one of them. Kim Elena Ionescu, she is now working with SCA. She used to work for Counterculture. When I first went to my first coffee origin trip, it was to Nicaragua with Counterculture, and she was there, and she became the coffee sustainability manager at Counterculture, and just a wealth of knowledge coming from this woman who knew about Central American coffee, the politics behind it, and how to make that a sustainable product for generations to come in these coffee-producing countries. And then also Timothy Hill, who actually started in production at Counterculture, and he's currently the green coffee buyer for Counterculture. So he kind of worked his way through the ranks, and just seeing how dedicated he is to not only coffee but to Counterculture. Mm-hmm. And the farmers and the relationships that they've established over the years was awesome. And he just wrote a book with Getu Bekele, who also works for Counterculture out in Addis Ababa, about coffee varieties. And yeah, I was actually fortunate to pick that book up when I was in Seattle. Mm-hmm. So those guys are amazing. And yeah, so those are my coffee mentors.
And then you just mentioned that you went to Origin, you went to where coffee is produced in Nicaragua. I also read that you've been to Kenya and Colombia. What was that experience like? How did that affect you going to these other countries and going right to where the coffee is sourced?
I felt like it put everything that I did in context. So I'm serving coffee, from these amazing places, and I'm talking about these coffees and these farmers to customers. And then all of a sudden, I'm actually on these farms, meeting these farmers, having conversations with them, connecting what I do in the cafe with what they do on the farm, because, most of them will never step foot in a U.S. cafe, and I felt like now I've come full circle. And I can see and touch this coffee. I can see the coffee blossoms on these coffee trees and pick these cherries and eat them, So it just made me see the bigger picture, and it put what I was doing in the cafe and in competition in context.
Right. I think that's a great experience for people to have, to see, because coffee is something that's often grown in poor countries and consumed in rich countries. And it's very easy for us who are the consumers. I speak to myself now, who's not in the industry, reporting about it, but going in and since I've been covering coffee, I've come to realize this more, that actually this goes way back. This goes all the way back to the people that are actually on the fields and picking the cherries and at the basics like that. And I know that there are a lot of people in the industry. And I know Counterculture is one of these, and I'm sure Black and White Coffee is as well, that has a deep concern for those people that are working in the fields, that are bringing us specialty coffee. And just if you could reflect on that for a minute.
Yeah, in the U.S., we've historically looked at coffee as it just being, oh, it's just coffee,
Right.
And the wine industry is a little different because you can go out and spend $100 on a bottle of wine, and most people that would do that, they can actually go to a vineyard in California and actually touch the grapes. They can talk to those folks that grow the grapes. So there's this connection. But because coffee is grown outside of the U.S., we can't really go there and connect and touch that coffee. So there's this kind of disconnect between what we're drinking in the U.S. and where it comes from. And I feel like especially coffee is slowly bridging that gap. And as baristas and coffee shop owners and roasters, I think it's our responsibility to ethically source coffees that are not going to leave farmers impoverished.
Right.
And and celebrate that. Yeah, we have some affordable coffees on our menu, but we also have some really high-end coffees on our menu that these farmers are going above and beyond what's expected of them to produce this high-quality product. And we're gonna pay for that, and we're gonna market that, and we're gonna celebrate that
Right.
in our cafe.
Right. I think that's great, Lemon. I think that people, if you go in a cafe, don't think, hey, I'm paying so much for this cappuccino or this espresso. Hey, a lot goes into this. This is specialty coffee. It's like a fine wine, a lot, and everybody should be compensated properly along the way. Yeah, and it's a big industry. Other than oil, coffee is the biggest commodity in the world, I'm told. And I just had a guy on,
Yeah,
Matt Hodges, who was working in Rwanda and was there after the Civil War, after the genocide there, and rebuilding the coffee industry because there are tens of thousands of people there alone that depend upon that industry for their livelihood. And I think it's fantastic. The more I dig into coffee and the industry, the more I'm finding that there's a real enormous number of people that are very ethical and want to make sure that everyone along the supply chain, from the beginning farmer to the end, is taken care of, and that what they produce is good. Along these lines, I read that you said a quote from you was, "Coffee brings people together." Uh, Tell us about that.
yeah. So that's one of the things I've noticed in a lot of coffee shops that I've frequented in the past and currently, that you have people from all walks of life just hanging out in this cafe, and sometimes there's conversations that spark up, sometimes not, but you have people that would not normally hang out together in this cafe, and they're drinking coffee and they're talking about whatever, students, professors, uh, you know, blue collar workers, whatever. They're hanging out in this cafe, and that's been kind of the tradition of the cafe from, if you go all the way back to where coffee came from, Ethiopia. You had this Ethiopia ceremony, which still takes place in Ethiopia, where you have this woman who roasts this coffee. She'll grind the coffee, and then she'll brew the coffee. And then all the members of the family will gather around this product and talk about what's expected of the day, what's going to happen today, or what happened the day before. And then as coffee moved into, Yemen, it was sort of the same thing. You had all these older men hanging out talking about what's going to happen, during the day or during the week, whatever. And then the younger men would hang out. And then as coffee got into Europe, these cafes would pop up, and people would spend time in this cafe. And then somewhere along the way, in the Industrial Revolution, where we just wanted to speed things up, as coffee got to the U.S., it was more of this kind of diner experience, in and out. And then with specialty coffee coming back in the 70s and 80s, we saw this reemergence of slowing things down and people spending time with the coffee.
Right.
And
I've certainly experienced a lot of those places traveling around the U.S., visiting literally hundreds
yeah,
of cafes. And I was in recently in all over Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and it's a big, big part of the culture there. I would love to go to Kenya, Yemen, these places, and really, focus on this culture that surrounds coffee in different places. But you're exactly right when you say it does bring people together, and Hey, for a lot of people, the happiest part of their day is whether it's in the morning, the afternoon, or the evening when they have that, first or second, or third cup of coffee, and they just feel, oh,
Yeah,
I
man.
can relax, everything's good. Hey, what is your coffee
Yeah.
consumption about like? When and how do you like to have your coffee?
Well, I love a cup of coffee early in the morning. I used to be a cappuccino guy,
Hmm.
but Barry is not agreeing with me lately. So it's a cup of coffee in the morning, and then there's several in there between
Right.
between lunch and dinner.
Great. And one other area I want to get into before we finish up today, that is you're in business now with Kyle Ramage, who's also been on the show. Great interview with him. And hey, being in business with somebody, that's like being married to somebody. You're working together real closely. He's also, both of you, champion baristas. I mean, tremendous skill levels. Tell us about how that came about, and what it's and tell us about your about Black and White Coffee and what's going on there.
Yeah, so I met Kyle, I don't know, a few years back, 6, 7 years ago, I'm not sure, when he started working for one of Counterculture's accounts. It was a coffee shop that really wanted to do specialty coffee really well, and they succeeded in doing that. And, the first, members of that staff came through the education program, and I was one of the instructors. So that's how I met Kyle.
Uh,
And then, through several, latte art throwdowns around the area, got to know him a little bit better. And then, in I guess it was 2014, 2013, a buddy of mine, Gary Horn, who owns Mount Clinic USA, was looking for a new staff member. I talked to Kyle, and they connected, and he started working for them. And then fast forward a few years later, I'm in the finals for the United States Barista competition. Never been in finals before. Really super stoked. And I didn't have anyone backstage to, taste the coffee with me. Because, when you get like anxious and nervous and excited, your palate just doesn't work.
right.
So Kyle was back there, servicing grinders and everything. I said, Kyle, can you help me taste this coffee? Because I don't taste anything. And, he tasted the coffee with me, helped me out with my flavor calls. And then, I was expecting to get sixth place, that day. And turns out I win it. And and Counterculture said, hey, you can take anybody you want with you to Dublin for the world competition. And I was like, well, Kyle is the type of person that he will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear.
Right.
And in the competition, that's what you need.
Right.
And so I took him with me to Dublin as my coach, and I did fairly well. I placed fourth in the world. And then that kind
Wow.
of sparked this whole idea of, hey, man, I want to compete too, says Kyle. And I was like, well, I'll help you. And so he had me as his coach in 2017, and then he won. And for those 2 years, we had discussed, opening our own cafe, just a coffee shop. We walk into a coffee shop and say, oh, I love how they're doing this. I love how they're doing that. And, I wanted all of our equipment to be white, and he wanted all the equipment to be black. And they were like, oh, black and white coffee. And so that's how we came up with the name. And then after he won the United States Barista competition, a friend of his who had a coffee shop and roastery back alley was looking to sell it. And so Kyle came to me and said, this is our chance. So we formed Black and White Coffee Roasters and bought Back Alley. And then we put a little more meaning behind Black and White, because what we both agree with is that especially coffee industry has kind of gone into the stratosphere, leaving the average coffee drinker behind. So you have folks that walk into these specialty coffee shops and they're like, well, I don't know what I want because all this is very new to me. And then you might have some pretentious baristas that, all right, oh, you want to put cream and sugar in your coffee? Oh, this is a fine geisha. You can't do that, blah, blah, blah. So we wanted Black and White to be more approachable. We wanted to make specialty coffee as approachable as possible. So we wanted to keep that simple. So that's our vision. That's our mission with specialty coffee, to make it super approachable for everyone.
Right. That's a
Not
great,
an
yeah.
elitist kind of thing.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's a great point, Len, because one of the criticisms, one of the things you see is, you'll go into a lot of specialty coffee shops. It's like going into Whole Foods or something. It's certain you feel it's a little bit elitist. Some people want to
Yeah,
go in,
man.
but they want
Yeah.
to go in, but they feel it's kind of a, they feel a little intimidated. They might ask the stupid question. I mean, I've certainly been through all of that, and I'm still trying to climb up the learning curve here. And it's like, and there are coffee nerds I don't like being around because I feel dumb. I feel like, oh my God, I might, how goofy was that? So how do you do that? How do you bridge that gap? Because coffee does bring together people together. It should be more inclusive. It started and
Right.
it
Right.
became popular in so many different varied parts of the world. How do we keep it from becoming more and more elitist? How do we have the democratization of coffee and coffee culture? I think that's very important. It's something I want to promote.
So I think it's all about simplicity. Simplicity is more memorable, and
Hmm.
the more you remember something, the more you'll come back to it time and time again. So we wanted to start with our blends. We have 3 blends that I feel anyone can enjoy with milk and sugar or with lattes. Latte is one of the largest drinks sold in America, and that's milk and coffee. So let's find a coffee or a blend that's going to work really well with milk because that's what people want.
Hmm.
And let's give them what they want. So, we started out with our first blend called the Classic, and the Classic is called the Classic for that reason. This is your classic coffee flavor. Uh, you know, Bold, chocolatey. Sweet.
Hmm.
It works well in milk and sugar. Works well with a latte with vanilla syrup. And that's where we began. We wanted to start out with some really approachable blends, and then add to that menu with these relationships that we developed over the years with importers, with coffee farmers, and bring these coffees in and add them at an affordable price as much as possible. So we're not making a killing off of these coffees that we're paying a lot for.
Hmm.
Um, we want to make those affordable and approachable for anyone who's wanting to, move from the classic or the typical Colombian coffee to a Panamanian geisha, and there's steps in between there. And so our menu is pretty basic. We keep things very simple. So when people come in, they'll see it and they'll say, okay, I want a latte. I want a cappuccino. We don't have 1,000 different syrups. We make all of our syrups in-house, which is vanilla and a honey simple syrup. And it's something very simple.
Well, so in addition to roasting, you do have retail. You have one location where you have a cafe.
Yes. Yeah, we have a cafe. So basically, the front of the business is the cafe, and then in the back is roasting and production.
Right. What one last question, and that is, where do you see black and white coffee in 5, 10 years from now?
Well, I love the Southeast U.S.
Hmm.
I would love to open a couple more cafes and continue to, push what we're doing here in North Carolina all over the country. We've gotten some great response from the industry. I mean, we're selling our coffee in California now, which is, I mean, I'm still like,
Wow.
I'm still amazed by that.
Wow.
I mean, we weren't really trying to push our wholesale until 2018, but when people found out that the 2016 and 2017 barista champions opened a roastery and cafe, they were calling us. And so that was when we were like, okay, let's find some really nice coffees that we can put on the menu and sell those all over the country.
Lem, where are you located in North Carolina? And also, how do people
Uh,
find you online if they want to order your coffee?
yeah. So we're in Wake Forest, North Carolina, which is a 20-minute drive from the capital, Raleigh. And you can find us online at blackwhiteroasters.com.
blackwhiteroasters.com. We'll have all of that up. Well, it's really been a pleasure talking to you today. A lot of fun. I learned a lot, and I wish you great success. And I think you guys are on heading in a great direction. And I think you and Kyle are both leaders in the world of specialty coffee in the States. And I think you guys are going in a great direction. So I wish you to continued success.
Thanks a lot, man. Stay caffeinated.
I will.